One coffee spill changed everything. A black woman healed a billionaire's lonely heart. The coffee was still hot when it hit his $1,000 suit. Jonathan Fletcher felt the heat through expensive fabric and realized it was the first thing he'd truly felt in months. Not metaphorically. Actually felt. The 37-year-old billionaire had been numb for so long he'd forgotten what sensation was. Now a beautiful stranger was touching his chest with napkins, apologizing in that voice, and he was feeling everything. The warmth. The embarrassment. The connection. The sudden, desperate hope that this moment wouldn't end. Close your eyes for just a moment. Think about the last time a story made you feel something real. Made your heart race. Made tears fall without permission. Made you remember why being human is so beautifully complicated. That's what we do here at CJ Stories. Whether you're returning or just discovering us, welcome home. This is your safe space for tears, laughter, hope, and everything in between. Today's story will take you somewhere unexpected. It'll make you think. It'll make you feel. And I promise you, you won't see the ending coming. But here's the thing, the magic only works if you stay till the very end. No skipping. No rushing. Just you, me, and a story that might just change how you see the world. If it moves you, let me know you're here, subscribe, like, and share this with someone whose heart needs touching today. Ready? Let's step into today's story. The coffee was still hot when it hit his $1,000 suit. Jonathan Fletcher, 37-year-old tech billionaire, stood frozen in the middle of Perkins and Page's Bookstore café in Charleston, South Carolina, watching espresso soak into Italian wool. Most men in his position would have lost their composure. Jonathan just looked tired. Oh no. Oh, I'm so sorry. The voice belonged to the woman who'd collided with him. She was already grabbing napkins from the nearest table, her dark brown skin flushed with embarrassment, her natural curls pulled back in a silk scarf that matched her vintage dress. She moved with the kind of easy grace that suggested this bookstore was her domain, even as she frantically tried to blot coffee from his jacket. It's fine, Jonathan said quietly, stepping back slightly. Really? It's absolutely not fine. That suit probably costs more than my monthly insurance payment. She looked up at him then, and he felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were warm brown, direct and intelligent, with laugh lines at the corners that suggested she smiled often. She wasn't smiling now. She looked genuinely distressed. I wasn't watching where I was going. I was trying to balance 3 orders and read a shipping label at the same time, which my business partner keeps telling me is impossible, but I keep thinking I can manage it. She was still talking, still blotting uselessly at his jacket, and Jonathan realized he should probably say something. I'm the one who should apologize. I was looking at my phone instead of where I was walking. He glanced at the device in his hand, the screen lit up with 17 unread messages. He'd come to Charleston to escape those messages. Fat lot of good that had done. The woman stepped back, napkins clutched in her hand, and really looked at him for the first time. He watched her eyes travel from his face to his ruined suit to the phone he'd unconsciously clutched tighter, and something in her expression softened. Tell you what, she said. I'm Charlotte Perkins. I own this place. And I'm going to make you the best latte you've ever had, on the house, while you tell me if that suit can be saved or if I need to start a payment plan. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion that had settled into his bones over the past 5 years, Jonathan almost smiled. Jonathan Fletcher. And I think the suit will survive. Fletcher. She tilted her head, recognition flickering across her face. As in Fletcher Technologies? The Jonathan Fletcher who just made the Forbes 400 list. He waited for what always came next. The shift in demeanor. The calculated interest. The sudden awareness of what he was worth. It didn't come. Instead, Charlotte winced. That makes the coffee spill so much worse. Rich people always sue. This time he did smile, just a little. I don't sue people for accidents. Good to know. Come on, let me at least get you cleaned up and caffeinated. It's the least I can do. She led him toward the back of the bookstore, past shelves of carefully curated books and small tables where people sat reading. The space was beautiful in a way that felt intentional but not precious. Exposed brick walls, plants hanging in the windows, art from local artists. The coffee bar took up the back corner, all reclaimed wood and vintage equipment that looked well-loved and well-used. Charlotte moved behind the counter with efficient familiarity, grabbing a clean towel and handing it to him. Bathrooms through that door if you want to actually assess the damage. Jonathan took the towel and disappeared into the small bathroom. When he emerged a few minutes later, jacket draped over his arm and shirt blotted as dry as he could manage, Charlotte had already started on his drink. He watched her work. There was something meditative about the way she moved, measuring and steaming and pouring with the kind of attention that suggested coffee making was more than just a transaction to her. She caught him watching and didn't look away. "So what brings a tech billionaire to Charleston?" she asked, her hands never stopping their work. "We're lovely, but we're not exactly Silicon Valley." "That's exactly why I'm here." She glanced up at that, something knowing in her expression. Running from something or toward something? The question was direct in a way that should have felt invasive. It didn't. "Honestly? I'm not sure anymore." Charlotte finished his latte, creating some kind of leaf pattern in the foam that he suspected was more complicated than it looked. She slid it across the counter to him. "Well, you picked a good place to figure it out. Charleston's good for the soul. Assuming you actually let yourself experience it instead of spending the whole time staring at your phone." He looked down at the device he'd set on the counter, still buzzing with notifications. When he looked back up, Charlotte was watching him with an expression that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite amusement. "You're very direct," he said. "My mama raised me to say what I mean. Life's too short for dancing around things." She poured herself a cup of regular coffee and leaned against the back counter. "So is this a vacation or are you fleeing something specific? Is this how you treat all your customers? Interrogate them after spilling coffee on them? Only the ones who look like they need someone to ask real questions." She took a sip of her coffee. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one that says you're incredibly successful and absolutely exhausted and not sure which thing caused the other." She said it gently, without judgment. "I see it sometimes. People who've achieved everything they thought they wanted and then can't figure out why they still feel empty." Jonathan picked up his latte, buying himself time. He should have been offended. He should have made an excuse and left. Instead, he found himself sitting down on one of the stools at the counter. "My assistant booked me a month at a house on Sullivan's Island. She said if I didn't take a break, she was going to quit, and she's too good at her job for me to lose." He took a sip of the latte. It was, objectively, the best coffee he'd had in months. "I've been here 3 days and I've spent most of it on conference calls." "That's sad," Charlotte said plainly. "Excuse me?" Not in a judgy way. In a genuinely sad way. She set down her coffee. "You've got the whole world at your fingertips, enough money to do anything you want, and you're spending your mandatory vacation working. That's just sad." He should have been annoyed. Wealthy people didn't appreciate being called sad by strangers who spilled coffee on them. But there was something about the way she said it, matter-of-fact and kind, that made it impossible to take offense. "What would you do?" he asked. "If you had a month off?" "I wouldn't know. I haven't had a day off in 2 years." She grinned at his expression. "See? We're both disasters, just different kinds. Why haven't you taken a day off in 2 years?" "Because I opened this place 3 years ago, and the first year was just survival, and the second year was finally breaking even, and this year I'm actually thriving, but I'm terrified that if I stop moving, the whole thing will fall apart." She said it like she was describing the weather. "Plus, I love it. This place is everything I dreamed about when I was working corporate jobs that made me want to cry in bathroom stalls." Jonathan found himself leaning forward. "What did you do before this?" "Marketing for a pharmaceutical company. Good money, soul-crushing work, the kind of place where they called pizza parties culture and expected you to be grateful." She refilled her coffee. "I did it for 8 years because it was stable and my mama didn't raise a quitter. But then she passed, and I realized I was spending my one life doing something that didn't matter to me at all." "I'm sorry. About your mother." "Thank you. It was 3 years ago, but some days it feels like yesterday." Charlotte's expression softened with old grief. She used to say life's too short to spend it making other people rich while your own dreams gather dust. "So I cashed out my 401k, found this space, and built something that feels like mine." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The bookstore hummed with quiet activity around them. Someone laughed at a table near the window. Pages turned. The espresso machine hissed. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said finally. "You're going to anyway. Do you ever regret it? Giving up the stability?" Charlotte considered the question seriously. "Some days, yeah. When the AC breaks and the repair costs more than I budgeted for the whole month. When I'm doing my taxes and remembering what a steady paycheck felt like." She looked around her bookstore, her expression going soft. "But then I'm here, in this space I built, serving coffee to people who come back because they feel something here. And I remember that security isn't the same thing as happiness." Jonathan looked down at his phone again, at the messages from board members and investors and executives who all wanted pieces of him he wasn't sure he had left to give. "I built my company in my garage," he said quietly. 7 years ago, it was just me and my best friend from college, trying to solve a problem nobody else seemed to care about. We worked 18-hour days and ate ramen and genuinely believed we were going to change the world." "And did you? Change the world?" "Maybe a small corner of it. Our software helps hospitals communicate better. Saves lives, probably. We've got over 5,000 employees now. Worth about $4 billion at last valuation. He heard the flatness in his own voice. My co-founder sold me his shares 3 years ago and moved to Thailand. Said he didn't recognize what we'd built anymore. Said it felt like we'd traded passion for profit. Do you think he was right? Jonathan looked at Charlotte. She wasn't watching him with pity or judgment, just genuine curiosity. Like his answer actually mattered to her. Yeah, he admitted. I think he was absolutely right. The door chimed as a customer walked in. Charlotte glanced over, gave them a warm smile and a "be right with you," then looked back at Jonathan. I should let you work, he said, standing. Probably. But come back tomorrow if you want. I open at 7, and the morning crowd is the best crowd. Lots of regulars who actually talk to each other instead of just staring at screens. She said it pointedly, and he almost laughed. Is that your pitch? Come back so a stranger can continue pointing out everything wrong with my life? I prefer to think of it as offering perspective. Charlotte grinned. Plus, you still owe me the chance to make you coffee that I don't spill on you. I've got a reputation to maintain. Jonathan picked up his jacket, coffee-stained and expensive and suddenly seeming ridiculous. Same time tomorrow? I'll be here. I'm always here. He turned to leave, then stopped. Charlotte. Yeah? Thank you. For the coffee and the honesty. Anytime, Jonathan Fletcher. He walked out into the Charleston heat, phone already buzzing in his pocket, but for the first time in months, he didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, he thought about a woman who'd given up security for meaning, who spoke her mind without apology, who'd looked at him and seen past the net worth to something more interesting underneath. His assistant had booked him a month in Charleston. 3 days ago, it had felt like exile. Now it felt like possibility. The next morning, Jonathan arrived at Perkins & Page's at 7:15. The early crowd Charlotte had mentioned was already there. A group of older women occupied the big table by the window, laughing about something. A young man sat in the corner working on a laptop. 2 people browsed the fiction section, coffee cups in hand. Charlotte stood behind the counter, talking to a regular customer with the ease of long familiarity. She looked up when Jonathan walked in, and her whole face brightened. You came back. And without coffee stains this time. I figured I'd give you another chance to prove yesterday wasn't a fluke. Bold of you to assume I won't find something else to spill on you. She turned to the espresso machine. Same as yesterday? Please. He watched her work again, that same meditative focus. The customer she'd been talking to, an elderly black man with kind eyes, smiled at Jonathan. You must be special. Charlotte doesn't usually make the fancy drinks 2 days in a row for anyone but her favorite people. Mr. Green, don't embarrass me in front of the customers, Charlotte said, but she was smiling. I'm just stating facts. You told Mrs. Patterson last week that if she wanted another caramel macchiato, she'd have to wait until her birthday. Mrs. Patterson orders them 3 times a day and then complains they're too sweet. That's different. Jonathan found himself smiling at the easy banter. Mr. Green patted his shoulder. Take care of our girl. She works too hard. I can hear you, Charlotte called. You're supposed to hear me. Maybe you'll actually listen. When Mr. Green had taken his coffee to join the women by the window, Charlotte slid Jonathan's latte across the counter. Don't mind him. He thinks because he's been coming here since day 1, he can boss me around. How long have you known him? He was my first customer. Literally walked in while I was still painting the walls and asked if I had coffee yet. I made him a cup on my personal coffee maker, and he's been coming every morning since. She poured herself coffee. Tells me about his grandkids. Brings me tomatoes from his garden. Argues with me about books. He's good people. Jonathan glanced around the bookstore again, seeing it with fresh eyes. This wasn't just a business. It was a community. Charlotte had built something that mattered beyond the profit margin. What? Charlotte asked, catching his expression. Nothing. Just realizing I can't remember the last time I knew my customers' names. Well, you've got 5,000 employees. That's different. Is it? He took a sip of his coffee. Perfect again. I used to know everyone. Back when it was 20 of us crammed in an office space we couldn't really afford. I knew their kids' names and their favorite lunch orders and what projects excited them. And now? Now I know their productivity metrics and salary bands and which ones are flight risks. He heard the bitterness in his voice and tried to soften it. Sorry. You didn't ask for my crisis at 7 in the morning. Actually, I kind of did. I'm the one who told you to come back. Charlotte leaned against the counter. Can I ask you something? Fair's fair. Why'd you build it? The company, I mean. What was the original dream? Jonathan thought back to those early days. Him and Marcus in that garage, convinced they were going to revolutionize healthcare communication. The excitement of solving problems. The satisfaction of building something from nothing. My mom died because 2 hospitals couldn't coordinate her care properly, he said quietly. She had a rare heart condition. Went to the ER, they treated her for the wrong thing because they didn't have her records from her cardiologist. By the time they figured it out, it was too late. Charlotte's expression shifted into soft understanding. I'm sorry. I was 32. Successful enough to be comfortable, not successful enough to feel like I'd done anything that mattered. And I kept thinking that if hospitals could just talk to each other better, maybe she'd still be alive. He gripped his coffee cup tighter. So Marcus and I built software to fix that. To make sure nobody else's mother died because of a communication gap. That's beautiful, Jonathan. It was. For a while. When every hospital we signed felt like we were saving lives. When every piece of feedback made the product better. When it still felt personal. He exhaled slowly. Now it's all about market share and quarterly earnings and keeping investors happy. The mission gets mentioned in marketing materials, but it's not why anyone comes to work anymore. Is that why you're here? In Charleston? My assistant said I was burning out. That I was running myself into the ground and taking my whole executive team with me. She gave me an ultimatum. Take a month off or she walks, and she'd encourage my whole senior staff to follow her. Charlotte's eyebrows went up. She sounds like good people. The best. Which is why I'm here instead of in my office. He looked at Charlotte directly. But I don't know how to not work. I've spent the last 5 years building this company into something massive. Without that, I'm not sure who I am anymore. Maybe that's the real question you're supposed to answer this month. Before Jonathan could respond, a woman in her 20s approached the counter, and Charlotte shifted seamlessly into her customer service mode. Jonathan took his coffee to a table by the window, nodding at Mr. Green and the group of women who welcomed him with warm smiles. He pulled out his phone, fully intending to check his email. Instead, he found himself just sitting, watching Charlotte move through her space with such obvious love for what she'd built, listening to the conversations around him. Noticing the careful way books were displayed, the art on the walls, the plants thriving in the morning light. When had he last just sat? When had he last noticed anything beyond the next deadline, the next meeting, the next crisis that needed managing? Charlotte caught his eye from across the room and smiled. Just a small smile, nothing dramatic, but it settled something in his chest he hadn't realized was unsettled. His phone buzzed. His CFO, probably. Or his head of product. Or any of the 100 people who needed his input on things that had felt urgent 3 days ago and now felt very far away. He silenced it and took another sip of his coffee. For the first time in 5 years, Jonathan Fletcher let himself just be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. By the end of June, Jonathan had fallen into a rhythm he'd never experienced before. Every morning at 7:15, he walked into Perkins and Page's. Every morning, Charlotte had his latte ready by the time he reached the counter, that same warm smile greeting him like he belonged there. You're late, she said on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the coffee incident. It's 7:17. Traffic was terrible. Jonathan, you're staying on Sullivan's Island. It's a 12-minute drive. What traffic? He grinned, settling onto his usual stool. I stopped to watch the sunrise over the bridge. Lost track of time. Charlotte paused in her coffee making, turning to look at him fully. You stopped to watch the sunrise. Is that so strange? For the man who showed up here 3 weeks ago checking his phone every 45 seconds? Yeah, that's pretty strange. She finished his latte, but instead of sliding it across the counter, she came around to sit on the stool next to him. Good strange, though. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The morning crowd moved around them with familiar patterns. Mr. Green held court at his usual table. A book club met in the corner, their discussion of that month's selection already animated. Someone laughed near the poetry section. I've been thinking about what you said, Jonathan began. About not knowing who I am without work. And? I think you were right. I've spent so long being the CEO, being the guy who built Fletcher Technologies, that I forgot there was supposed to be a person underneath all that. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. So I've been trying something. What kind of something? Every day, I do one thing that has nothing to do with work or productivity or building anything. Just something because it sounds interesting or peaceful or fun. He felt almost embarrassed saying it out loud. Yesterday I went kayaking. Tuesday I spent 2 hours in an art gallery. Monday I sat on the beach and read a book that wasn't about business strategy. Charlotte's smile could have lit up the whole bookstore. Jonathan Fletcher, are you learning how to be a human being again? Trying to. It's harder than it sounds. The best things usually are. She bumped his shoulder with hers, a casual touch that shouldn't have made his heart rate increase but absolutely did. I'm proud of you. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you showed up here exhausted and lonely and running on empty. And I know you're actually trying to do something about it instead of just white-knuckling your way through. She took a sip of her own coffee. That takes courage. Or desperation. Sometimes those are the same thing. A customer approached with a question about a book order, and Charlotte excused herself. Jonathan watched her work, the easy competence of her movements, the genuine warmth she showed every person who walked through her door. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd learned things about her. Small details that had accumulated into a picture of someone remarkable. She opened the bookstore at 7 every morning and didn't close until 9 at night. She knew most of her regulars by name and coffee order. She had a degree in English literature from the College of Charleston and had once dreamed of being a writer before practical concerns pushed her toward corporate work. She called her mother Mama and still teared up sometimes when talking about her. She was funny and direct and kinder than she probably realized. And Jonathan was absolutely attracted to her in a way he hadn't been attracted to anyone in years. You're staring, Charlotte said, returning to her seat. Sorry. Don't apologize. Just be less obvious about it. Mr. Green already asked me if you were going to ask me out, and I had to pretend I didn't know what he was talking about. Jonathan nearly choked on his coffee. He what? He's 78 years old and has been happily married for 56 years. He considers himself an expert on romance and thinks everyone else needs his guidance. She was grinning now. He told me you look at me like his grandson looks at chocolate cake. That's mortifying. It's kind of sweet, actually. Charlotte met his eyes directly. For what it's worth, I told him you were a customer and a friend, and that was plenty. The word friend shouldn't have stung. They were friends. He came to her bookstore every morning, they talked for hours, she'd become the best part of his day. That was friendship. Except friendship didn't explain why his pulse jumped every time she smiled at him. It didn't explain why he'd started timing his visits to maximize their conversation time. It didn't explain why he went home every night thinking about things she'd said, perspectives she'd offered, the way her whole face changed when she laughed. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. For me to be a customer and a friend? Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. I think that's what makes sense. You're here for a month. You've got a whole life back in San Francisco. I've got this place that I can't exactly pack up and move. She looked down at her coffee. Starting something when there's an expiration date seems like a good way to get hurt. You're right. That's completely logical. But I can't stop thinking about you anyway. The words hung between them. Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, and he watched her process what he'd just admitted. Around them, the bookstore continued its morning rhythm, oblivious to the shift happening at the counter. Jonathan. I know all the reasons why it doesn't make sense. I've listed them to myself 100 times. He turned to face her fully. But I've spent 5 years making logical decisions that led me to being miserable and alone. So maybe logic isn't what I need right now. What do you need? Honestly? I'm still figuring that out. But I know that the happiest I've been in years is sitting on this stool talking to you every morning. He took a breath. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're interested, I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere that's not your bookstore, where you're not working and I'm not just a customer. Just to see what that's like. Charlotte bit her lip, and he could see her thinking through all the implications. The practical concerns. The logical reasons to say no. Friday night, she said finally. I close at 9. Pick me up at 9:30. Relief and excitement flooded through him in equal measure. Yeah. But Jonathan? She met his eyes seriously. I need you to know I don't do casual. I'm 35 years old, I've got a business I love, and I'm not interested in being someone's vacation fling. That's not what this is. You say that now. But in a couple weeks, you're going back to California and your billion-dollar company and your real life. I need you to think about what happens then before we start something we can't finish cleanly. She was right. She was absolutely right. The responsible thing would be to acknowledge the timeline, maintain appropriate boundaries, protect them both from unnecessary hurt. I've thought about it, he said. I'm still asking. Okay then. A smile tugged at her lips. Friday, 9:30. And if you take me somewhere pretentious, I'm ordering the most expensive thing on the menu just to make a point. Noted. Nowhere pretentious. Good. Now I actually have to work, and you should probably go do whatever billionaires do when they're not bothering bookstore owners. Jonathan laughed, standing. I'll see you tomorrow morning? 7:15. Don't be late. He left the bookstore feeling lighter than he had in months. Possibly years. His phone buzzed with the usual cascade of messages, but for once, they felt manageable. He'd been checking in regularly, handling the truly urgent items, and delegating everything else to his capable executive team. The company hadn't collapsed. The world hadn't ended. Everything kept moving without him micromanaging every detail. It was a revelation he was still getting used to. Friday night arrived with June humidity and Jonathan's first real bout of nervousness in recent memory. He'd negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. He'd pitched to venture capitalists who could make or break his company. He'd given keynote speeches to thousands of people. But standing outside Perkins and Page's at 9:30, waiting for Charlotte to lock up, he felt like a teenager picking up his prom date. She emerged in a yellow sundress that made his breath catch. Her hair was down, natural curls framing her face. She'd changed from her usual work clothes into something that felt both effortless and deliberate, and she was absolutely beautiful. "You're staring again," she said, but she was smiling. "Can you blame me? Smooth talker. Where are we going?" I asked Mr. Green for recommendations. He gave me a list of 3 places, all with strict instructions about how to treat you properly. Charlotte laughed, the sound warming something in his chest. He did not. He absolutely did. He also told me if I hurt you, he knows people. I'm not entirely sure he was joking. He definitely wasn't. Mr. Green is very protective. She fell into step beside him as they walked toward his car. "So which place did you choose?" "The Fleet Landing. Right on the water, seafood," he said. "The she crab soup is the best in Charleston." "Good choice. Not too fancy, great food, and close enough that I can walk home if you turn out to be terrible company." "I appreciate you having an exit strategy. I'm a business owner. I always have an exit strategy." Dinner was easy in a way Jonathan hadn't anticipated. They sat outside on the patio, overlooking the water as the sun set and turned everything gold. Charlotte ordered the she crab soup and crab cakes. Jonathan got the fish of the day. They split a bottle of wine and talked about everything and nothing. She told him about opening the bookstore, the terror and exhilaration of signing the lease, the first customer who wasn't Mr. Green, the moment she realized she'd actually done it. He told her about the early days of Fletcher Technologies, before it became an empire, when it was just him and Marcus trying to change a small corner of the world. "Do you miss it?" Charlotte asked. "That version of the company?" "Every day. But I don't know if I can get it back. We're too big now. There are too many stakeholders and too much money involved." He swirled his wine. "Marcus understood that before I did. That's why he left." "Have you talked to him since?" "Occasionally. Holiday cards. The odd text message. He seems happy in Thailand. Teaching coding to kids, surfing, living in a beach house." Jonathan smiled, though it felt bittersweet. "He invited me to visit. I keep saying I will and then never making the time. Maybe you should. After this month, I mean. Maybe." He looked at her across the table, the evening breeze moving her curls, her expression open and interested. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever want more? Not just the bookstore, but something bigger." Charlotte considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I think about opening a second location. Or doing author events, maybe a small publishing arm for local writers. Little expansions that feel manageable." She paused. "But honestly, I built Perkins and Page's to be exactly what it is. A place that feels like home. Where I know my customers and they know me. Where it's not about scale or market domination, just about creating something meaningful." She met his eyes. "I know that probably sounds small to someone who built a $4 billion company." "It sounds perfect," he said quietly. "It sounds like you actually figured out what I'm still trying to learn." "What's that?" "That bigger isn't always better. That success doesn't have to mean endless growth. That maybe enough can actually be enough." They finished dinner as the stars came out. Jonathan paid despite Charlotte's half-hearted protest, and they walked slowly back toward the bookstore where her car was parked. The Charleston streets were alive with Friday night energy, but Jonathan barely noticed anyone but the woman beside him. "Thank you for tonight," Charlotte said when they reached her car. "I had a really good time." "Good enough for a second date? Fishing for compliments already?" "I prefer to call it confirming interest." She laughed, and the sound made him want to find ways to make her laugh every day for the foreseeable future. "Yes, Jonathan. I'd like a second date." "Tomorrow?" "I work tomorrow. All day. Saturdays are busy. Then I'll come by. Drink coffee. Buy books. Be excellent company during your busy day." "You don't have to do that." "I want to." He stepped closer, just slightly. "I like being around you, Charlotte. Working or not working, I just like being in your orbit." She looked up at him, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she reached out and squeezed his hand, the touch brief but electric. 9:30 tomorrow night, she said. After I close. There's a place I want to show you. Mysterious. I like it. Good night, Jonathan. Good night, Charlotte. He watched her drive away, then walked to his own car with a stupid smile on his face that he couldn't have suppressed if he tried. His phone had 14 missed calls and 37 unread emails. He looked at them, acknowledged that nothing was actually on fire, and put the phone away. Some things were more important than being constantly available. Some things, he was learning, were worth protecting. Saturday night, Charlotte took him to Waterfront Park after she closed the bookstore. They walked along the pier, past the pineapple fountain, out to where you could see the harbor and the lights of the city reflected on the water. I come here when I need to think, she told him. After Mama died, I spent a lot of nights sitting right there. She pointed to a bench facing the water. Trying to figure out what came next. Whether I was brave enough to actually quit my job and open the bookstore or if I was just going to keep dreaming about it forever. What made you finally do it? I realized I was more scared of getting to the end of my life and wondering, what if, than I was of failing. She sat on the bench, and he joined her. Mama always said regret is heavier than fear. So I jumped. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water. Jonathan reached for her hand without thinking, and she laced her fingers through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. I need to tell you something, he said. That sounds ominous. It's not. Or maybe it is. I don't know. He took a breath. My assistant called yesterday. The board wants me back for a crucial meeting in 2 weeks. They're considering a major acquisition and they want my input. He felt Charlotte tense slightly beside him. Are you going? I don't know. Technically I still have 2 weeks left of my month off. But this is a big decision for the company, and... He trailed off. And you're the CEO. They need you. Charlotte's voice was carefully neutral. They do. But also, they function fine without me for 3 weeks. My COO is more than capable of handling it. I've been reading the reports. Everything is running smoothly. So why are you considering going back early? Jonathan thought about how to answer that honestly. Because it's what I've always done. The company needs me, so I go. The company has a problem, I solve it. That's been my entire identity for 5 years. And now? Now I'm sitting on a bench in Charleston with someone who makes me want to be more than just my job title. And I'm trying to figure out if I'm brave enough to actually choose that. Charlotte turned to look at him fully. The moonlight caught her face, and she was so beautiful it made his chest ache. I can't make this decision for you, Jonathan. This is your company, your life, your choice. I know. But I can tell you that the man I met 3 weeks ago would have already been on a plane. He wouldn't have even considered saying no. She squeezed his hand. So maybe the real question isn't whether they need you. Maybe it's whether you trust them enough to handle it without you. She was right. The old Jonathan, the one who'd arrived in Charleston burned out and exhausted, would have already booked a flight. Would have apologized to his assistant for cutting the month short and promised to take time off later, knowing he never would. But that Jonathan had been slowly transforming into someone different. Someone who watched sunrises and kayaked and spent hours in bookstores talking to a woman who saw him as more than his net worth. I'm going to stay, he said, the decision settling into place as he spoke it. I'm going to tell them to handle it without me, and I'm going to trust that they can. Charlotte's smile was radiant. Yeah. I came here to figure out who I am without work. I'm not done figuring that out yet. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. And I'm definitely not done spending time with you. Good answer. This time when she leaned in, he met her halfway. The kiss was soft and sweet and tasted like possibility. When they pulled apart, Charlotte was laughing softly. What? He asked. I'm just thinking about how you literally crashed into my life covered in coffee, and now here we are. Best accident I ever had. Smooth talker. You keep saying that like it's a bad thing. She kissed him again, longer this time, and Jonathan thought that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand what Marcus had tried to tell him years ago. That some things mattered more than market share and quarterly earnings. That connection and meaning and actually living your life were worth more than any amount of money. They stayed at Waterfront Park until nearly midnight, talking and kissing and watching the water. And when Jonathan finally drove back to Sullivan's Island, he didn't think once about the meeting he was missing or the acquisition he wasn't weighing in on. He thought about Charlotte's laugh and the way she kissed him and the fact that for the first time in 5 years, he was exactly where he wanted to be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. The first week of July brought heat that shimmered off Charleston's cobblestone streets and something Jonathan hadn't expected: genuine happiness. He and Charlotte had fallen into an easy rhythm that felt both new and comfortable. Morning coffee at the bookstore, evenings exploring the city together, stolen kisses between customer interruptions, late-night phone calls when they couldn't sleep. It was a Tuesday morning when reality started creeping back in. Jonathan sat at his usual spot at the counter, watching Charlotte create some elaborate drink for a customer, when his phone rang. Not buzzed. Actually rang, which meant it was his assistant Claire, one of 3 people whose calls bypassed his Do Not Disturb settings. Charlotte glanced over at the sound, and he gave her an apologetic look before answering. "Claire. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly. But we need to talk about the timeline." Claire's voice was professional but firm. "You've got 2 weeks left, and there are some things we need to discuss before you come back." "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something." "Jonathan, you're sitting in a coffee shop. I can hear the espresso machine." He smiled despite himself. "Fair point. What do you need?" "The acquisition fell through. The board handled it, but there are hurt feelings about you not being there. Marcus Chen from the venture firm called again about the buyout offer. And your keynote at the Tech Health Conference is in 3 weeks. They need your presentation outline by Friday." Jonathan felt the familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders. The conference. He'd completely forgotten about the conference. "I'll get them the outline." "There's more. Your father called." That made him pause. "My father called the office?" "Twice. Said you weren't returning his personal calls. He wants to know when you're coming back to San Francisco." Claire's voice softened slightly. "Jonathan, I know this month was supposed to be about disconnecting, but you're going to have to reconnect eventually. I'm just trying to make sure that transition is as smooth as possible." "I know. Thank you, Claire. Are you okay? You sound different." "I'm good. Actually good. I'll call you later about the conference, okay?" When he hung up, Charlotte was watching him with a careful expression. "Everything all right?" "Yeah. Just work stuff bleeding into vacation time." He tried to smile. "My assistant reminding me that real life exists outside of Charleston. Do you want to talk about it?" Before he could answer, the door chimed and Mr. Green walked in, followed by a woman Jonathan had never seen before. She was in her 60s, well-dressed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. "Charlotte, baby, you didn't tell me you had such handsome company keeping you occupied every morning," the woman said, her voice warm and teasing. Charlotte's face lit up in a way Jonathan had only seen when she talked about her mother. "Aunt Diane. What are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming until next week." Change of plans. The conference ended early. The woman pulled Charlotte into a tight hug, then turned to assess Jonathan with sharp, intelligent eyes. "And you must be the young man Mr. Green has been telling me about." "Guilty as charged. Jonathan Fletcher." He extended his hand. "Diane Perkins. Charlotte's aunt and the person who co-signed the loan that made this beautiful place possible." She shook his hand with a firm grip. "Mr. Green tells me you've been keeping my niece company. That you're some kind of tech billionaire taking a vacation from your empire." "Aunt Diane," Charlotte said, her voice holding a warning. "What?" "I'm just making conversation." Diane's smile was warm but her eyes were evaluating. "How long are you in Charleston, Jonathan?" 2 more weeks. "And then back to California?" "That's the plan." Diane nodded slowly, still smiling, but Jonathan saw something shift in her expression. "Well, any friend of Charlotte's is welcome here. I'm going to steal her for a bit if you don't mind. Family catching up to do." Charlotte gave Jonathan an apologetic look as her aunt guided her toward the back office. He waved her off, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. He'd seen that look before. The polite assessment followed by the careful distance. The unspoken question, "What exactly are your intentions with my niece?" Mr. Green slid onto the stool next to him. "Don't mind Diane. She's protective. I get it. Charlotte's lucky to have people who care about her." "She is. Especially after losing her mama." Diane stepped in, helped her get this place off the ground, checks in regular. Mr. Green fixed him with a direct look. "Charlotte doesn't let people in easy. She's been hurt before. So when she does let someone in, we pay attention. I'm not trying to hurt her. Nobody ever is, son. But hurt happens anyway, especially when there's an expiration date on things." He said it kindly, but the words landed hard. "You seem like good people. And I've seen the way you look at my girl. Just want to make sure you've thought about what happens when your vacation ends." Jonathan wanted to say he had thought about it. That he'd been thinking about it constantly. But the truth was, he'd been actively avoiding thinking too hard about August 15th, the day he was supposed to return to San Francisco and his real life. "I care about her," he said finally. I can see that. Question is whether caring is going to be enough when you're 3,000 miles away. That evening, Jonathan picked Charlotte up from the bookstore and drove them to Folly Beach. They walked along the shore as the sun set, and he could feel her tension. Your aunt doesn't like me, he said finally. She doesn't know you. She's just worried. Charlotte bent to pick up a shell, turning it over in her hands. She asked me what my plan was. What happens when you leave? What did you tell her? That we're figuring it out. She looked at him. Are we? Figuring it out? Jonathan stopped walking. I've been thinking about it. And I don't have a good answer yet. My whole life is in San Francisco. The company, my house, my responsibilities. But the happiest I've been in years is right here with you. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own inability to solve this like a business problem. I don't want this to end when I leave Charleston. I don't either. But I also don't know what the alternative looks like. Charlotte sat down on the sand, and he joined her. I can't leave, Jonathan. This bookstore is everything I worked for. My whole community is here. Aunt Diane, Mr. Green, all the regulars who've become family. This is my home. I know. And you can't exactly run $1 billion company from Charleston. Technically I could. People do remote work all the time. Be serious. Your headquarters is in San Francisco. Your board is there. Your whole executive team. You can't just relocate your entire life because you met someone on vacation. She said it gently, but he heard the resignation underneath. Why not? Charlotte turned to look at him. Because that's not realistic. Because we've known each other for 3 weeks. Because you'd end up resenting me for it eventually. You don't know that. I know that I watched my best friend move across the country for a man she'd been dating for 2 months. She gave up her job, her apartment, her whole support system. 6 months later, he broke up with her and she had to rebuild her entire life from scratch. Charlotte's voice was quiet. I'm not saying that would happen with us. But I'm saying I need to be realistic about what's possible here. Jonathan wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her that he wasn't some random guy, that what they had was different, that they could make it work. But the practical part of his brain, the part that had built a successful company through careful planning and risk assessment, knew she was right. 3 weeks wasn't long enough to upend entire lives. So what do we do? He asked. I don't know. Maybe we just enjoy the time we have left and see what happens after. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm not trying to push you away. I just need to protect myself a little bit. They sat on the beach until the stars came out, not talking, just being together. Jonathan's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. Work things. Always work things. He ignored them all and focused on the feeling of Charlotte beside him, the sound of the waves, the present moment that felt both perfect and precarious. The next week passed too quickly. Jonathan tried to stay present, to focus on morning coffees and evening walks and the way Charlotte's face lit up when she talked about books she loved. But the outside world kept intruding. His father called again. The board sent increasingly pointed emails about his return. The Tech Health Conference confirmed his keynote. Reporters started asking for interviews about Fletcher Technologies' next moves. And through it all, Jonathan felt himself being pulled in 2 directions. The life he'd built over 5 years, demanding his attention and presence. And the life he was building here, fragile and new and desperately important. It was the second Tuesday in July when everything came to a head. Jonathan was at the bookstore, laptop open for the first time in weeks, trying to draft his keynote presentation. Charlotte was doing inventory, giving him space to work. The comfortable silence they developed felt strained today. His phone rang. His father, again. This time, Charlotte looked over. You should probably take that. Jonathan stepped outside into the humid afternoon. Dad. Finally. I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. Robert Fletcher's voice was clipped with irritation. What's going on, Jonathan? Claire says you're refusing to come back early for important meetings. The board is concerned. The board is fine. Everything is running smoothly. That's not the point. You're the CEO. You should be here. I'm taking the time off you've all been telling me to take for the past 2 years. A week or 2, sure. But you've been gone a month, and now you're talking about staying another 2 weeks? That's excessive. His father paused. Claire mentioned you've been spending time with someone. Is that what this is about? Jonathan felt his jaw tighten. This is about me taking care of myself. By hiding in South Carolina and avoiding your responsibilities? That doesn't sound like taking care of yourself. That sounds like running away. His father's voice shifted, becoming more concerned. Son, I know you've been working hard. But the solution isn't to abandon everything you've built. Come home. We'll figure out a better work-life balance. But you need to be here. I have 2 weeks left. The venture capital firm increased their buyout offer. We need to discuss it seriously. That's a conversation that needs to happen in person, with the full board. Jonathan closed his eyes. The buyout offer. They'd been circling for months, offering increasingly absurd amounts of money for Fletcher Technologies. Money that would make him wealthier than he already was and free him from the daily responsibilities of running the company. Money that would also mean giving up the thing he'd built from nothing. I'll think about it. Think fast. They want an answer by the end of the month. His father sighed. Look, I know this is hard. But you made a choice when you started this company. You don't get to just walk away because you're tired or because you met someone on vacation. Leadership means showing up, especially when it's difficult. When Jonathan walked back inside, Charlotte was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. How bad? She asked. They want me to come back early. There's a buyout offer on the table that the board wants to discuss. He sat down heavily. My father thinks I'm being irresponsible. Are you? Being irresponsible? The question surprised him. I don't think so. I'm taking the time I was told to take. But you're also avoiding some pretty big decisions. Charlotte came to sit across from him. I heard part of the conversation. A buyout offer is huge, Jonathan. That's not something you should be making decisions about while you're on vacation. Whose side are you on here? I'm not on a side. I'm trying to be honest with you. She reached across the table for his hand. I like having you here. I like us. But I also don't want to be the reason you make a decision you'll regret later. You're not a decision I'd regret. Maybe not now. But what about in 6 months when you've sold your company or abandoned your responsibilities and you're looking around wondering what happened to your life? Her voice was gentle but firm. I can't be that person for you, Jonathan. I can't be the reason you blow up everything you've built. That's not what this is. Isn't it? A little bit? She squeezed his hand. You came here burned out and exhausted, and that's real. You needed this break. But at some point, you have to go back and actually deal with whatever made you burned out in the first place. You can't just run away from it. Jonathan pulled his hand back, feeling defensive and knowing she was probably right, which made it worse. I thought you understood. I do understand. I understand that you're at a crossroads and you're scared and you don't know what the right answer is. But hiding in my bookstore for another 2 weeks isn't going to give you clarity. It's just going to delay the inevitable. So what are you saying? That I should leave early? I'm saying you should make whatever decision is right for you and your company, regardless of what's happening between us. Charlotte's eyes were bright, and he realized with a start that she was fighting tears. Because if you stay just for me, you'll resent me eventually. And if you go back and try to maintain something long distance when we both know the odds are against us, we'll just drag out the hurt. Charlotte, I care about you so much. Her voice cracked slightly. These past few weeks have been incredible. You've reminded me that it's possible to connect with someone on a real level. But we both knew this had an expiration date from the beginning. It doesn't have to, doesn't it? She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. Be honest, Jonathan. Really honest. Can you see yourself leaving San Francisco permanently? Leaving your company, your responsibilities, everything you've built? He wanted to say yes. Wanted to make grand promises about choosing her over everything else. But the truth was more complicated. I don't know, he admitted quietly. And that's okay. That's actually the most honest answer you could give. Charlotte wiped at her eyes. But I need to protect my heart here. I've already let you in more than I should have, and it's going to hurt when you leave regardless. I just need to start preparing myself for that. So what does that mean? We just stop seeing each other for the next 2 weeks. No. I don't want that either. I just need us both to be realistic about what this is and what it can be. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to choose me over your life, Jonathan. I would never ask that. I'm just asking you to be clear with me about what you can actually offer. The bell above the door chimed as a customer walked in. Charlotte quickly composed herself, wiping her eyes and putting on her professional smile. Jonathan watched her shift into work mode, greeting the customer with warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. He gathered his laptop and left quietly, feeling like he'd just lost something precious even though technically nothing had ended. Outside, the July heat felt oppressive. His phone buzzed with another message from his father. Jonathan stood on the Charleston street, caught between 2 lives, and realized he had no idea how to choose between them without losing something vital either way. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. Jonathan didn't go to the bookstore the next morning. Or the morning after that. He told himself he was giving Charlotte the space she'd asked for, but the truth was simpler and more painful. He didn't know what to say to her. Instead, he sat in the Sullivan's Island house and did what he'd spent 5 weeks avoiding. He worked. He read every report his executive team had sent. He analyzed the buyout offer in detail, running projections and scenarios. He drafted and redrafted his keynote presentation. He took calls with board members and listened to their concerns about his prolonged absence. And every single moment, he thought about Charlotte. The way she laughed when he said something unexpectedly funny. The careful attention she gave to every customer who walked through her door. The quiet strength in how she'd built something meaningful from nothing. The feeling of her hand in his as they walked along the beach. By Thursday, he'd made himself miserable with productivity. Claire called that afternoon. "Okay, what happened?" "What do you mean?" "You've responded to 47 emails in the past 2 days, redlined 3 contracts, and sent me a presentation outline at 2 in the morning. You're supposed to be on vacation, Jonathan. This is the opposite of vacation." He leaned back in his chair, looking out at the ocean beyond the windows. "Maybe I'm ready to come back." "Are you? Or are you running away from something?" "When did you become my therapist?" "When I became the person who's worked with you for 6 years and knows when you're lying to yourself." Claire's voice softened. "What happened with the bookstore owner?" "Her name is Charlotte. And nothing happened. We just had an honest conversation about reality." "Which is code for what exactly?" Jonathan exhaled slowly. "She asked me if I could actually see myself leaving San Francisco. Leaving the company. And I couldn't give her a definitive answer." "Because you don't know or because you're scared of the answer? Does it matter?" "Yeah, actually, it does." He heard Claire moving around, probably pacing her office the way she did when she was thinking through a problem. "Jonathan, I've watched you build this company from nothing. I've seen you make impossible decisions and handle crises that would break most people. But I've also watched you disappear into work until there was nothing left of you outside of it. Is there a point to this?" "The point is that for the past 5 weeks, you've sounded different. Lighter. Like you remembered there was supposed to be a person underneath the CEO title." She paused. "So if this woman helped you find that again, maybe the question isn't whether you can leave San Francisco. Maybe it's whether you can afford not to." After they hung up, Jonathan sat with those words for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called Marcus. His former business partner answered on the 3rd ring. "Jonathan Fletcher. I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth." "Close. I'm in Charleston." "South Carolina? What are you doing there?" "Honestly? I'm not entirely sure anymore." Jonathan found himself smiling despite everything. "How's Thailand?" "Humid, beautiful, exactly what I needed. I'm teaching coding to teenagers and surfing every morning. It's a good life." Marcus paused. "You sound different. Tired but different." "I met someone." "Now that's interesting. Tell me about her." So Jonathan did. He told Marcus about spilling coffee and morning lattes and a woman who'd built something meaningful on her own terms. About falling for someone who saw him as more than his net worth. About the impossible choice between a life he'd built and a life he was just beginning to imagine. Marcus listened without interrupting, the way he always had when they were building the company together, when they'd stay up until 3 in the morning solving problems and dreaming about the future. "Do you love her?" Marcus asked when Jonathan finished. The question landed hard. "I've known her for 5 weeks." "That's not what I asked." Jonathan thought about Charlotte's laugh. The way she bit her lip when she was thinking. How she made him want to be more than just his job title. The empty feeling in his chest the past 3 days without seeing her. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I do." "Then what are you still doing in that house? Why aren't you at her bookstore?" "Because it's not that simple. I can't just abandon everything I built. The company, the employees who depend on me, the investors who trusted me with their money. You're right. You can't just abandon it." Marcus's voice was gentle. "But you can make different choices about how you run it. You can delegate more. You can hire a COO who actually handles operations. You can work remotely part of the time. You can restructure your entire life if you want to badly enough. The board would never go for that. The board works for you, not the other way around. And if they can't support you having an actual life outside of work, maybe that tells you something about whether this is sustainable long term." Jonathan heard the unspoken message. This was what Marcus had tried to tell him 3 years ago when he left. That the company had consumed them both, and Marcus had chosen to walk away before it consumed everything. "Do you regret it?" Jonathan asked. "Leaving? Not for a second. Best decision I ever made." Marcus paused. "But that was my choice. You have to make yours. I'm just saying that you built something incredible, Jonathan. But you also built a prison for yourself. And the only person who can unlock it is you." Friday morning, Jonathan woke up early and made a decision. He got in his car and drove to Charleston, but he didn't go to the bookstore. Instead, he went to Waterfront Park, to the bench where Charlotte had told him about her mother, where they'd had their first kiss. He sat there for 2 hours, watching the sunrise over the harbor, thinking about everything that had led him to this moment. He'd built Fletcher Technologies because his mother's death had shown him a problem worth solving. But somewhere along the way, the mission had gotten buried under growth targets and market share and proving he could build something massive. He'd lost the thread of why it mattered. Charlotte had found her thread and held on to it. She'd built something smaller but more meaningful. Something that served her community and brought her joy instead of just stress and exhaustion. He wanted that. Not instead of the company, but alongside it. He wanted balance. He wanted a life that felt like living instead of just producing. And he wanted Charlotte. His phone rang. His father, again. "I'm coming back next week," Jonathan said before his father could speak. "But not permanently. I'm going to split my time between San Francisco and Charleston." "That's not practical." "Maybe not. But it's what I'm going to do." "Jonathan, you can't run a company from 3,000 miles away." "I can run it differently. I'm going to hire a COO to handle day-to-day operations. I'll be there for board meetings and major decisions, but I'm delegating the rest. And I'm restructuring my role so I can actually have a life outside of work." His father was quiet for a long moment. "Is this about that woman Claire mentioned?" "It's about me finally understanding what you tried to tell me after Mom died. That working yourself to death doesn't honor the people you've lost. That life is short and you have to actually live it." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Your mother would have liked her. This woman who makes you want to change your life." The words caught Jonathan off guard. His father rarely mentioned his mother, the grief still too close even 5 years later. "I think she would have," Jonathan said, his voice rough. "Then you should probably go talk to her instead of me." The bookstore was busy when Jonathan walked in at 10 o'clock. Friday morning regulars filled the tables, and Charlotte was behind the counter making drinks with her usual focused attention. She looked up when the door chimed, and he watched emotions flicker across her face too quickly to name. She finished the drink she was making, handed it to the customer, then came around the counter. "Can we talk in the back?" He followed her to the small office, closing the door behind them. They stood facing each other in the cramped space surrounded by boxes of books and supply orders. "I'm sorry I disappeared," he said. "That wasn't fair to you." "I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have pushed you away like that. I got scared." Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself. "I've been miserable the past 3 days." "Me too. I kept making your latte every morning out of habit. Mr. Green asked if you died, and I realized I didn't even know because I'd been too proud to text you." Jonathan stepped closer. "I love you." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Jonathan. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 5 weeks. But I love you, Charlotte. The way you see the world, the way you built something meaningful with your own hands, the way you make me want to be more than just my job title." He took a breath. "And I've spent the past 3 days trying to figure out how to make this work, because walking away from you isn't an option I'm willing to consider. You don't have to choose between me and your company. I'm not. I'm choosing both. I'm going to restructure how I run Fletcher Technologies. Hire a COO, delegate operations, work remotely part of the time. I'll need to be in San Francisco for board meetings and major decisions, but I can split my time between there and here." Charlotte shook her head slowly. "That's not realistic. You can't run a billion-dollar company part-time from Charleston." "Why not? People work remotely all the time. And my executive team is more than capable of handling day-to-day operations. I've been micromanaging for years because I didn't trust anyone else, but they've proven they can function without me breathing down their necks." He moved closer, taking her hands. "I'm not saying it'll be perfect. There will be weeks when I'm in California more than I want to be. There will be times when work intrudes on our time together. But I'm willing to figure it out if you are." "What about the buyout offer?" "I'm going to turn it down. That company is my legacy, my mother's legacy. I'm not ready to walk away from it entirely. But I can run it differently. I can build a life that includes it instead of being consumed by it." Charlotte was quiet, and he could see her thinking through all the implications, all the ways this could go wrong. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked softly. "What if you try this and you end up resenting me for it? What if it does work? What if we actually figure out how to build something together that makes both our lives better?" He squeezed her hands. "I'm scared too, Charlotte. This is terrifying. I've spent 5 years in complete control of every aspect of my company, and I'm talking about loosening that control in ways that feel impossible. But I'm more scared of losing you. I love you too." The words came out whispered, like she'd been holding them back and finally couldn't anymore. I've been in love with you for weeks, and it's been scaring me to death." Jonathan pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, wrapping herself around him like she was afraid he might disappear. He held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, coffee and books and something uniquely Charlotte. "So we try?" he asked into her hair. "We try. But I need you to promise me something. Anything." She pulled back to look at him. "If this isn't working, if the distance or the logistics or the reality of trying to balance everything becomes too much, you have to tell me. We have to be honest with each other, even when it's hard. I promise. And you have to actually take care of yourself. I didn't fall in love with you so I could watch you work yourself to death from a different location." He smiled. "I promise that too." Charlotte reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing along his jaw. "I can't believe you're restructuring your entire life for me. Not just for you. For me too. For the life I want to have instead of the one I've been sleepwalking through." He turned to kiss her palm. "You reminded me what it feels like to actually live. I'm not giving that up." They kissed then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Charlotte was smiling through tears. "I have to get back to work. Friday mornings are always busy. Can I stay? I promise to actually buy books this time instead of just taking up counter space." "You better. I'm running a business here, not a charity for billionaires with feelings." But she was grinning, and the lightness was back in her expression. They walked back out together, and the morning regulars didn't even try to hide their interest. Mr. Green gave Jonathan a thumbs up. The book club ladies whispered and smiled. Even the teenagers in the corner looked up from their phones to watch. Charlotte just shook her head and went back to making coffee, but Jonathan caught her looking over at him every few minutes with a smile that made his heart race. He bought 6 books he didn't need and a coffee mug that said, "Reading is my cardio." He sat at his usual spot and actually read instead of working, looking up every so often to watch Charlotte move through her space with such obvious love for what she'd built. His phone buzzed with messages. His executive team, his board, his father, all waiting for decisions and direction. For the first time in 5 years, Jonathan felt no urgency to respond immediately. They could wait. The company would survive a few hours without his input. Right now, he was exactly where he needed to be. Around 1 o'clock, Charlotte came to sit with him during a brief lull. "So when do you have to go back?" "Monday. I need to be there for the board meeting about the buyout. But I'll be back by the end of the week." "And then?" "And then we figure it out as we go. Together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long moment, comfortable and connected in the middle of her busy bookstore. "Hey Jonathan," Charlotte said softly. "Yeah? I'm really glad you spilled coffee on you." He laughed, the sound full and genuine. "Best accident I ever had." Outside, Charleston went about its Friday afternoon. Inside Perkins and Page's, surrounded by books and coffee and the woman he loved, Jonathan Fletcher finally felt like he'd come home. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. 3 months later, October brought cooler temperatures to Charleston and changes to Fletcher Technologies that would have seemed impossible back in June. Jonathan stood in the newly renovated office space above Perkins and Page's, looking out the window at King Street below. Charlotte had initially protested when he'd suggested renting the empty second floor of her building, but he'd convinced her it made sense. He needed workspace when he was in Charleston, and having it directly above the bookstore meant he could see her throughout the day. The compromise had become their pattern. 2 weeks in San Francisco, 2 weeks in Charleston, with video calls and constant communication bridging the distance. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. His phone chimed with a message from Claire, "Board meeting starts in 5. You ready?" Jonathan opened his laptop and joined the video conference. His board of directors appeared on screen, gathered in the San Francisco conference room he'd spent countless hours in over the past 5 years. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "I know we've been discussing this transition for the past few months, and I wanted to give you a final update before we make it official." He pulled up the presentation he'd spent weeks refining. "As you know, we've hired Margaret Chen as our new Chief Operating Officer. She spent the past 3 months learning our systems and processes, and she's exceeded every expectation. Effective November 1st, she'll be taking over all day-to-day operations." One of the board members, Richard Vance, leaned forward. "And your role will be what, exactly?" "I'll remain CEO and maintain strategic oversight. I'll be present for all board meetings, major client pitches, and crucial decisions about company direction. But the operational details will be Margaret's domain." Jonathan met Richard's eyes through the camera. "I know some of you had concerns about this structure when I first proposed it. But the past 3 months have proven the company can function with me in a more strategic role rather than being involved in every decision. The numbers support that, another board member said, pulling up a report. Revenue is up 7% this quarter. Employee satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in 2 years. Client retention is strong. Because people aren't burned out anymore, Jonathan said. Including me. I've been able to focus on the big picture instead of getting lost in details that my very capable team can handle. And that's made me a better CEO, not a worse one. The discussion continued for another hour, but Jonathan could feel the shift. 3 months ago, half the board had been skeptical of his proposed restructuring. Now, with proven results, even the skeptics were coming around. When the meeting ended, his father stayed on the call. "You did good, son," Robert Fletcher said. "Your mother would be proud of what you've built. And how you're choosing to live while building it." The words settled warm in Jonathan's chest. "Thanks, Dad. So when do I get to meet this woman who convinced you to restructure your entire life?" "Actually, I was hoping you'd come to Charleston for Thanksgiving. Charlotte's hosting at her place, and her Aunt Diane will be there. Seems like a good time for family introductions." His father smiled, the expression softening his usually serious face. "I'd like that. Send me the details." After they hung up, Jonathan sat for a moment in the quiet office. Through the floor, he could hear the muffled sounds of the bookstore below. Voices, laughter, the espresso machine hissing. Charlotte's world, which had become his world too. His phone buzzed with a text from her. "Are you coming down for lunch or are you going to make me bring food up to you?" He smiled and typed back, "Coming down. 5 minutes." But first, he had one more call to make. Marcus answered from Thailand, where it was late evening. "Let me guess. The board meeting went well." "Better than expected. They're fully on board with the new structure." "Of course they are. You've proven it works. How's Charlotte?" "Perfect. Busy. Currently threatening to withhold lunch if I don't get downstairs in the next 5 minutes." Marcus laughed. "I like her more every time you talk about her. So when are you going to make it official?" Jonathan looked at the small velvet box on his desk, the one he'd been carrying around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Soon. I'm still figuring out the how. Don't overthink it. Charlotte doesn't strike me as someone who needs grand gestures." "Maybe not. But she deserves one anyway." They talked for a few more minutes before Jonathan headed downstairs. The bookstore was moderately busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Green sat at his usual table, reading the newspaper. A book club met in the corner. Several people browsed the shelves while sipping coffee. Charlotte stood behind the counter, helping a customer find a specific title. When she saw Jonathan, her whole face lit up in the way that still made his heart skip. "There you are. I was about to send a search party. Sorry. Board meeting ran long. But it went well." "Yeah? Tell me about it over lunch." "I made sandwiches." She called over her shoulder, "Keisha, can you cover the counter for 30 minutes? A young woman emerged from the back office, one of the 2 part-time employees Charlotte had finally hired after Jonathan had gently pointed out that working 7 days a week wasn't sustainable. "I've got it. Go eat." They took their sandwiches to the small courtyard behind the bookstore, a hidden space Charlotte had turned into a garden oasis with plants and string lights and a small table. It had become their lunch spot when Jonathan was in town. "So the board is officially supportive?" Charlotte asked, biting into her sandwich. "Completely. Margaret starts as COO on November 1st, and I transition to a more strategic role. Which means I can be here 3 weeks a month instead of 2. Charlotte's eyes widened. "Really? You didn't tell me that part." "I wanted to make sure the board approved it first. But yeah, I'll only need to be in San Francisco 1 week a month for in-person meetings and client visits. The rest I can handle from here." She set down her sandwich and reached for his hand. "That's huge, Jonathan. It's what I want. What we both want, right? More time together, less time apart. Definitely what I want." She squeezed his hand. "How are you feeling about it?" "Honestly?" It was such a Charlotte question, always checking in on the truth underneath the surface. "Honestly? I'm excited. A little scared, maybe. This is the first time in 5 years I've truly let go of control, and that's hard. But mostly I just feel relieved. Like I can finally breathe again." "Good. Because you look about 1,000 times better than you did in June. You're sleeping, you're eating actual meals, you're not constantly glued to your phone. That's all because of you. It's because of you making different choices. I just gave you a reason to want to." Charlotte paused, looking at him with soft eyes. "I'm proud of you. This wasn't easy, and you did it anyway." They finished lunch talking about Charlotte's plans for the bookstore. She was hosting a local author event next week and considering starting a monthly poetry reading. Small expansions that felt manageable and exciting rather than overwhelming. This was what happiness looked like, Jonathan realized. Not the rush of closing a major deal or the validation of hitting revenue targets. Just sitting in a garden with the woman he loved, talking about nothing and everything, feeling completely at peace. The velvet box felt heavy in his pocket. Soon, he promised himself. Very soon. 2 weeks later, Jonathan put his plan into motion. You want to do what? Charlotte asked, looking up from the inventory spreadsheet she'd been working on. A bookstore event. A special one, just for your regular customers. An appreciation night for the community you've built. Jonathan kept his voice casual. You're always talking about how Mr. Green and the book club ladies and everyone have become like family. I thought it would be nice to honor that. That's sweet, but I don't have time to plan a whole event right now. You don't have to. I'll plan it. You just have to show up and enjoy it. Charlotte narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Why do I feel like you're up to something? Because you're perceptive. But trust me, okay? Let me do this for you. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Okay. But nothing too fancy. These are regular people, not Silicon Valley types. I promise. Low-key and meaningful. Over the next week, Jonathan worked with Diane and Mr. Green to coordinate everything. They spread the word to all the regulars, arranged for catering from Charlotte's favorite local restaurant, and set up the bookstore for an evening gathering. The night of the event, Charlotte walked into the bookstore after running errands to find it transformed. String lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow. Her regular customers filled the space, about 40 people who'd become the heart of her business. Soft music played in the background, and tables held food and drinks. Surprise, Jonathan said, coming to meet her at the door. Charlotte's hand went to her mouth. Jonathan, what is this? This is me showing you what you've built. Not just a business, but a community. These people love this place because you created something worth loving. Mr. Green approached with a glass of wine for Charlotte. We wanted to celebrate you, sweetheart. You've given us a home. The next 2 hours were filled with warmth and laughter. People shared stories about what Perkins and Pages meant to them. The book club ladies talked about how Charlotte had helped them through lonely times after their husbands passed. A young man shared how he'd found his love of reading again in this space. A mother talked about bringing her daughter here every Saturday morning, creating traditions that would last a lifetime. Charlotte cried happy tears through most of it, holding Jonathan's hand like an anchor. As the evening wound down, Jonathan cleared his throat and addressed the room. Can I have everyone's attention for a moment? The conversations quieted. Charlotte looked at him questioningly. 5 months ago, I walked into this bookstore by accident. Well, I crashed into the owner and got coffee all over my suit, but let's call it fate. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I was exhausted and lonely and had forgotten what it meant to actually live instead of just work. And then I met Charlotte. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. You showed me what it looks like to build something meaningful. To create value that isn't measured in dollars or market share, but in human connection and community and love. You reminded me who I was underneath the job title. You made me want to be better. Charlotte's eyes were already shining with tears. Jonathan, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world. I love that you call people out when they're hiding from themselves. I love that you built this beautiful space where people feel seen and valued. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. And I love you enough to restructure my entire life so I get to be part of yours. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. Around them, people gasped and clutched each other's hands. Charlotte Perkins, will you marry me? Charlotte looked at the ring, then at Jonathan, then at all the faces watching them with such obvious love and support. When she looked back at Jonathan, she was crying and laughing at the same time. You planned this whole event just to propose in front of everyone? I wanted to propose surrounded by the community you built. The people who love you in this place. Because that's who you are, Charlotte. You're not someone who does anything in isolation. You're all about connection and relationships and bringing people together. She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Yes. Yes, of course yes. The bookstore erupted in cheers and applause. Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her while their community celebrated around them. When they finally broke apart, Charlotte was beaming. I can't believe you did this. You deserve to be celebrated. You deserve everything. Diane pushed through the crowd to pull them both into a hug. Welcome to the family, Jonathan. You take care of my girl. That's the plan. For the rest of my life. Mr. Green was next, shaking Jonathan's hand with tears in his eyes. You're good people. I knew it from the start. The celebration continued late into the evening. People shared toasts and hugs and well wishes. Charlotte showed off her ring to anyone who wanted to see it, which was everyone. Jonathan stood back at one point, just watching her interact with all these people who loved her, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what he'd been missing. Not just romantic love, but the richness of community and connection. The reminder that success wasn't about what you accumulated, but about what you gave and how you made people feel. Around midnight, after everyone had left and they'd cleaned up, Charlotte and Jonathan sat on the floor of the bookstore surrounded by books and string lights. "I still can't believe you're going to be my husband," Charlotte said, looking at her ring. "Better get used to it. You're stuck with me now." "Good. I happen to like being stuck with you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So what happens now? With the wedding, with our lives, with everything. Now we figure it out together. We plan a wedding that feels right for us. I keep splitting my time between here and San Francisco. You keep building this incredible business. And we make a life that works for both of us. What about kids? Have we talked about kids? We have time to figure that out. But yeah, I'd like kids someday. If you do. Ido. Maybe in a year or two, once we're settled into married life." She turned to look at him. "Can you see it? Our life together?" Jonathan thought about mornings in the bookstore and evenings in Charleston and building something meaningful together. He thought about teaching their future kids to love reading and taking them to the beach and creating the kind of family he'd lost when his mother died. "Yeah," he said softly. "I can see all of it. And it's beautiful." They sat in the quiet bookstore, making plans and dreaming about the future, until Charlotte started yawning. "Come on," Jonathan said, pulling her to her feet. "Let's go home." "Home. I like the sound of that." They turned off the lights and locked up, walking hand in hand to Charlotte's apartment above a gallery 2 blocks away. Jonathan had been staying there more and more lately, and it was starting to feel like their space rather than just hers. As they got ready for bed, Charlotte kept looking at her ring, smiling every time she caught the light. "Thank you," she said when they were finally settled under the covers. "For tonight, for the proposal, for choosing this life with me. Thank you for showing me what life could be. For not giving up on me when I was lost." Jonathan pulled her close. "I love you, Charlotte. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. I love you too. So much." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Jonathan didn't dream about work or stress or obligations. He dreamed about a future filled with books and coffee and morning conversations and a love that had changed everything. Epilogue, 6 months later. The wedding took place in April, in the courtyard behind Perkins and Page's. It was small and intimate, just 60 people who truly mattered to them. Mr. Green walked Charlotte down the aisle while Diane cried happy tears in the front row. Marcus flew in from Thailand to be Jonathan's best man. The book club ladies handled decorations, insisting that Charlotte deserved flowers everywhere. They wrote their own vows. Charlotte promised to always tell Jonathan the truth, even when it was hard to hear. To support his dreams while protecting her own. To build a life together that honored both their needs and values. Jonathan promised to never let work consume him again. To show up fully for their relationship. To appreciate what they were building together instead of always chasing the next milestone. Robert Fletcher cried during the ceremony, later telling Charlotte that she reminded him of his late wife. Strong and kind and unafraid to push Jonathan to be better. The reception lasted until midnight, with dancing and laughter and toasts that celebrated not just the couple but the community they'd built together. The bookstore had become a gathering place for so many people, and watching them all celebrate felt like a perfect reflection of what Charlotte and Jonathan had created. They honeymooned in Thailand, spending 2 weeks with Marcus and learning to surf and disconnecting from everything except each other. Jonathan left his laptop at home for the first time in a decade. When they returned to Charleston, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Jonathan worked from his office above the bookstore 3 weeks a month, traveling to San Francisco for the 4th week. Charlotte expanded the bookstore's hours and hired another employee, finally giving herself 1 day off per week. They bought a house in downtown Charleston with a yard for the future kids they talked about on lazy Sunday mornings. They hosted dinner parties and book clubs and became fixtures in the community Charlotte had built. Fletcher Technologies continued to thrive under the new structure. Margaret proved to be an exceptional COO, and Jonathan discovered that strategic oversight suited him better than micromanagement. The company launched new products that actually excited him again, innovations that reminded him why he'd started the business in the first place. On their first anniversary, they sat in the bookstore after closing, drinking wine and talking about the year that had passed. "Do you ever regret it?" Charlotte asked. "Restructuring everything, splitting your time, choosing this life?" Jonathan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Not for a single second. This is the best decision I ever made. Even better than building a billion-dollar company?" Especially better than that. Because this actually makes me happy. He kissed her forehead. You make me happy. Charlotte smiled against his chest. Good. Because you're stuck with me forever now. Best accident I ever had. She laughed, the sound filling the bookstore with warmth. Outside, Charleston settled into evening. Inside Perkins and Page's, surrounded by books and string lights and the life they'd built together, Charlotte and Jonathan held each other close. They'd both been lost in different ways when they met. She'd been working too hard, afraid to slow down and trust. He'd been running from emptiness disguised as success. But they'd found each other in a coffee-stained collision that changed everything. And together, they'd built something neither could have created alone, a life full of meaning, connection, and love that grew deeper every day. It was more than either had dreamed possible. And it was only the beginning. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next.